Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today,
Excited for this one.
we're going down to Texas.
Yeah.
And we're going to be exploring
I've been looking forward to this one for a while.
the Texas killing fields.
Yeah. It's a fascinating case.
I know that a lot of you listening probably already know
Oh, yeah.
the basics of this.
Everyone knows about this.
It's that stretch along the I-45 corridor
All right.
where dozens of bodies, mainly young women, have been turning up since the 70s.
Since the 70s, yeah.
But for this deep dive, we're going way beyond the headlines. We've got case files, articles, and even some insights from the Laura Recovery Center to really try to get into the
That's correct.
complexities of this case.
Yeah, it's just it's a web of interconnected stories,
Right.
Victims whose lives were cut short, tragically.
Yeah.
A huge list of suspects, and then a few cases where justice has actually been served.
Right. And it's really easy to just get overwhelmed by all the names and the dates and
It's hard to keep it all straight sometimes.
all the different cases.
Yeah.
So instead of just like going through a list,
Right.
we're going to try and find some of those like patterns and connections
Just a bigger picture.
that might help us make sense of this tragedy.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that stand out to you
Okay.
when you look at the big picture of the victims?
When I look at the big picture of the victims,
Yeah.
I think one thing that jumps out right away
Right.
is the age range.
Okay.
Most of the victims were between 12 and 25 years old.
So young.
Very young.
Yeah.
Which, raises questions about vulnerability and, who might have been targeting them.
So we're talking about young girls.
Yeah.
Many of whom were just living their lives.
Yeah, just kids, some of them.
Yeah. Going to school, working, hanging out with friends.
Right.
But then there are some specific cases that I think really highlight the dangers that they face.
Right.
For example,
Yeah.
there were several victims who were last seen at bus stops.
Oh, wow.
Like Colette Wilson, who vanished at just 13 years old.
That's so sad.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And then you have Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw,
Yeah.
both teenagers who were last seen walking along Seawall Boulevard in Galveston.
Together?
Or
Together?
together.
Yeah.
It's scary to think about.
And then their bodies were found months apart.
Oh, wow.
Which adds another layer of mystery to their disappearances.
Yeah.
It makes you
It
wonder.
really does make you wonder.
Was there something about those locations?
Right.
About the accessibility of those areas that made these girls easy targets?
That's a chilling thought.
It is.
Yeah.
And what's even more disturbing is that some of the victims shared physical similarities.
Right.
It makes you wonder if we're looking at the work of a serial offender.
You have to think who was drawn to a particular type.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where I think Michelle Garvey's case gets really interesting.
Yeah.
She went missing from Connecticut
Whoa.
at just 14.
Wow.
And her body was found in Texas.
Really?
Unidentified for years.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't until much later that DNA technology
Right.
finally connected her back to her family.
That must have been...
Can you imagine?
I can't even imagine.
Just the not knowing.
Yeah.
And then there's the story of Tina Gale Klaus
Okay.
and Harold Dean Klaus Jr. They were found murdered in 1981.
Oh, my God.
And their infant daughter, Holly Marie, vanished at the same time.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's almost too much tragedy to comprehend.
Hard to wrap your head around that.
A young couple murdered and their baby missing.
Yeah.
But thankfully, there was a glimmer of hope in that case.
Oh, good.
Against all odds.
Yeah.
Holly Marie was found alive and well in 2022.
What a story.
It's a truly remarkable story of survival.
It is.
But while it offers closure for Holly Marie,
Right.
it still leaves us with the unanswered questions
Of course.
surrounding her parents' deaths.
Yeah.
So we've got this pattern of young women disappearing.
Right.
Some with shared physical characteristics, and some cases with these almost unbelievable twists and turns.
Absolutely.
But who's behind it all?
Right.
The list of potential suspects is so long,
Yeah.
and their stories are just as complex as the cases themselves.
Well, let's start with Michael Lloyd Self,
Okay.
a gas station operator and a convicted sex offender.
Okay.
He confessed to the murders of Rhonda Johnson and Sharon Shaw,
Oh, wow.
but later claimed that he was coerced by the police.
Right. And that's a big question in this whole saga. How much can we trust these confessions?
Right.
Especially when there are allegations of misconduct.
Yeah.
Despite the inconsistencies, Self was convicted.
Right.
But it's a case that leaves you with a lot of unease. Then you have Edward Harold Bell.
Okay.
An exhibitionist with a history of arrests.
Right.
He wrote letters confessing to multiple murders.
Wow.
Including some in the Texas killing fields.
Wow.
But he was never charged.
He was never charged.
It's like he wanted the notoriety.
It sounds like it.
Couldn't back it up with any real evidence.
Right.
And then there's Mark Stallings,
Right.
a convicted kidnapper.
Right.
Who admitted to killing Donna Prudhomme, whose body was found in the killing field.
Okay.
But just like Bell,
yeah,
he hasn't been charged in her death either.
That's so strange.
It's a real puzzle.
It is.
You have these confessions,
right,
but without that physical evidence,
yeah,
it's hard to build a solid case.
Totally.
And it raises questions about the motives behind those confessions in the first place.
Yeah.
Were they genuine admissions of guilt?
Yeah.
Or was there something else at play?
Right.
And then, of course, we have to talk about Clyde Hedrick, who was featured in the Netflix docuseries
Right.
Crime Scene, The Texas Killing Fields.
I saw that.
He was recently released from jail after serving time for the murder of Ellen Beeson, whose body was also found in the killing fields.
Right.
But here's where it gets even more complicated.
Okay.
He was found civilly liable for the death of Laura Miller.
What?
But never criminally charged.
So what's the difference there?
So what's the difference?
I mean, why is he connected to so many victims?
Right.
But only convicted in one?
Yeah, so civil liability means that a court found him responsible for her death. Based on a preponderance of the evidence. But that's a lower standard of proof than what's required for a criminal conviction.
I see.
So he was ordered to pay damages to Miller's family, but he wasn't found guilty of murder in a criminal court.
Okay, so it's like he was responsible, but not enough to convict him.
And it's like, how do you wrap your head around that as a family member?
Totally.
You know?
It doesn't seem right.
So we've got this tangled web of suspects.
Yeah.
Some convicted.
Right.
Some not. Some who seem to be connected to multiple victims.
It's crazy.
But amidst all of this darkness, there are a few cases where justice has prevailed. And they offer a sliver of hope and closure for some families. And they also highlight the crucial role of advancements in forensic technology.
Absolutely.
So are you ready to explore those?
I am. I'm ready to shift gears here and look at those cases.
Yeah, let's shift our focus to those cases and examine how they contrast with the many unsolved mysteries of the Texas killing fields.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's go.
Let's go.
So, you know, when we talk about justice prevailing, it's interesting because even when there are convictions, the path to get there can be, you know, really long and winding.
Absolutely.
Take the case of Ellen Beeson, for example.
Right.
We already talked about Clyde Hedrick and his connection to her case. But it wasn't a straightforward path to holding him accountable.
It wasn't an open and shut case.
Right.
Initially, he was only convicted of abusing her corpse.
Right.
It wasn't until later, thanks to testimony from his ex-wife, that he was actually charged with her murder.
That's wild.
Makes you wonder how many other cases are out there where that crucial piece of evidence is just waiting to be discovered or unearthed.
That's the hope, isn't it?
Yeah.
That, you know, with time and maybe new advancements in forensic technology, more of these cases can be revisited and hopefully those responsible can be brought to justice.
It's definitely a glimmer of hope.
It is a glimmer of hope.
For the families who are still waiting for answers.
Absolutely.
Speaking of waiting for answers, the case of Shelley Sykes is one that really underscores that pain of uncertainty. She disappeared after leaving her job at a restaurant in Galveston. And despite the fact that 2 men were convicted of her aggravated kidnapping, her body was never found.
That's so sad.
It's tragic.
It's awful.
Not only was her life cut short,
Yeah.
but her family has also been denied that closure
Right.
of knowing what happened to her and where she is.
It's just horrible.
The 2 men convicted, John Robert King and Gerald Peters Worst,
Right.
have never revealed the location of her body,
Oh my gosh.
leaving her loved ones in this perpetual state of limbo.
I can't even imagine.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when there are convictions,
Yeah.
the story doesn't always have that neat and tidy ending.
It's not Hollywood.
Right.
It's real life.
sometimes those most affected
Yeah.
are left with these lingering questions
Right.
and that profound sense of loss. But while some cases remain shrouded in mystery,
Yeah.
there are others where scientific advancements have played a really pivotal role in bringing perpetrators to justice.
Absolutely.
The murder of Crystal Jean Baker
Okay.
is, I think, a prime example of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Crystal Jean Baker's case is remarkable because it really demonstrates the power of DNA technology in solving cold cases.
It's amazing.
It took 16 years.
Wow.
But ultimately, DNA evidence linked Kevin Edison Smith to the crime, leading to his conviction.
16 years later.
16 years later.
That's incredible.
What's so striking about this case is that that DNA technology used to convict Smith wasn't even available at the time of the murder.
It's like science fiction.
It is.
Catching up with reality.
That's what's so fascinating about forensic science.
Right.
Is it's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And as new techniques are developed, they can be applied to old cases, potentially uncovering new evidence and providing those long-awaited breakthroughs.
It's pretty cool.
But Crystal Jean Baker's case didn't just bring closure to her family. It also sparked a really significant change in the law.
Okay, so what was that?
Can you talk a little bit about the Crystal Jean Baker Act and its impact?
So the Crystal Jean Baker Act was enacted in Texas in 2009, and it allows law enforcement to collect DNA samples from individuals arrested for certain felonies, even before they've been convicted.
So even before they've been convicted.
So the idea behind this law is to expand that DNA database, increasing the chances of matching DNA from crime scenes to potential perpetrators.
So it's like a preemptive strike?
It is like a preemptive strike.
Using DNA to potentially prevent future crimes or solve cold cases by linking suspects to crimes that they may have committed in the past.
Precisely.
While there are certainly ethical considerations surrounding the collection of DNA from individuals who haven't been convicted of a crime, the potential benefits in terms of solving crimes and preventing future tragedies are significant.
It's huge.
Crystal Jean Baker's case really served as a catalyst for this important change in legislation, demonstrating how a single case can have these far-reaching implications.
It's a testament to the power of perseverance, both in terms of the investigators who never gave up on the case and also Crystal's family, who tirelessly advocated for justice.
They didn't give up.
They did not give up.
That's so important.
And speaking of DNA evidence, there's another name that looms large in this story.
Okay, who's that?
William Lewis Reese.
William Lewis Reese.
He's a convicted kidnapper and murderer who's been linked through DNA evidence to the deaths of multiple young women,
including some who were found in the Texas killing fields.
It's scary to think about.
Reese's case is just a stark reminder of the devastating impact that one individual can have.
Just one person.
Through DNA testing, he was linked to the deaths of Jessica Lee Kellyanne Cox and Laura Smether, all young women whose lives were tragically cut short.
It's just awful.
It's a chilling example of how a serial offender can operate undetected for years.
Yeah, under the radar.
Leaving a trail of devastation in their wake.
It's crazy.
And what makes Reese's case even more tragic is that he confessed to the murder of Laura Smether, a case that so deeply impacted the community.
Of course.
And led to the creation of the Laura Recovery Center, an organization that's dedicated to helping families find missing persons.
That's so important.
It's such a poignant example of how even amidst such immense grief and loss, there can be this really powerful drive to create something positive. Something that can help prevent others from experiencing similar tragedies.
For sure.
Laura Smether's legacy lives on through the work of the Laura Recovery Center.
That's good.
Offering support and resources to families facing, that nightmare of a missing loved one.
Of course.
It's inspiring to see how something so terrible can give rise to such a powerful force for good.
For sure.
But while these convictions offer a sense of closure and accountability for some families, we can't lose sight of the fact that there are still many unsolved cases in the Texas killing fields.
And I imagine those unsolved cases represent
Yeah.
not only unanswered questions,
Right.
but also, a deep well of pain
Yeah.
for the families who are still searching for answers and
Absolutely.
justice.
So we've delved into
Yeah.
the lives of some of the victims.
Yeah.
We've explored the complexities of the investigation.
Oh, sure.
And we've examined the cases where convictions have been secured.
Right.
But now we need to shift our focus to understanding, I think, the broader context.
The bigger picture.
Of the Texas killing fields.
Right.
What was it about this specific area, this stretch of highway, that made it such fertile ground for these horrific crimes?
Exactly.
Was it simply a matter of opportunity?
Yeah.
Or were there, deeper, more systemic factors at play?
It's a good question.
These are the questions we need to grapple with as we kind of move forward in our exploration of this really complex and tragic story.
Absolutely.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about those individual cases, in the Texas killing fields.
Right.
The victims, the suspects, the investigations.
The convictions.
The convictions. But now I think it's time to kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
The big picture.
What was it about this specific area, this stretch of the I-45 corridor, that made it so vulnerable to these kinds of crimes?
Well, that's a question that has puzzled investigators and criminologists for decades.
Right.
There's no single answer.
Right.
But one factor I think we need to consider is the rapid growth and development that this area experienced during the time period when many of these murders occurred.
So you're saying that, the very things that often bring prosperity to a region, economic expansion, population growth,
more people, more jobs,
could actually create conditions that make it more vulnerable to crime.
It's kind of counterintuitive, but
I guess it makes sense if you think about it.
You've got more people. You've got
more opportunities.
More opportunities. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe less oversight.
Right. And also more people coming and going.
Yeah. Transient populations.
Makes it harder to track people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's harder to establish those roots. That sense of community.
Right. A strong sense of community.
Yeah, exactly.
And I imagine that the vastness of the area, all those rural stretches along the highway might have also played a role.
It's easier to get away with something when there aren't a lot of people around.
If there aren't a lot of eyes.
Right. No witnesses.
Yeah.
It provides cover.
Isolation can be a double-edged sword.
Absolutely.
It can be a source of peace and tranquility.
Right.
But it can also provide cover.
But it can also be a shield.
Yeah, for those looking to do harm.
Yeah, for people who want to stay hidden.
But it's not just about the physical environment, right?
Right.
I think we also need to consider those social and cultural factors.
Yeah, absolutely.
That might have contributed to this dark chapter in Texas history.
Well, think about it.
What do you mean by that?
During the 1970s and 1980s, there was a lot of social upheaval in the United States.
Right.
Traditional values were being challenged.
Yeah.
There was this sense of unease and uncertainty in a lot of communities.
Okay.
And in some cases, that unease might have manifested itself in violence.
Right.
Particularly against women.
So you're saying that these murders might have been in part...
It's a possibility.
A reflection of those larger social anxieties at the time.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a really disturbing thought.
It's disturbing, but
it makes me wonder, are there parallels to what we're seeing today?
That's a good question.
We're living in a time of, immense change and uncertainty.
A lot of division.
Political polarization.
Right.
Economic instability.
Yeah.
Social media echo chambers.
All of that.
Could that be contributing to a rise in violence?
I think it's something we need to be aware of.
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where organizations like the Laura Recovery Center come in.
Right.
Right.
It's so important.
They're not just about finding missing persons.
Right.
They're also about empowering communities.
They're about prevention.
Yeah, to be more proactive in protecting themselves.
Absolutely.
They offer training programs.
They do.
Educational resources, support networks.
It's amazing the work they do.
To help families and communities become more resilient and less vulnerable to crime.
Yeah.
And they also advocate for policy changes.
They do.
That can improve safety and security.
It's all important.
It's inspiring to see how something so tragic, the loss of Laura Smither, could lead to such a powerful force for good.
It's amazing.
So for our listeners out there,
Yeah.
what can they do
What can we do
to make a difference?
It's easy to feel helpless.
Right. It's easy to feel overwhelmed
When you hear these stories,
by the darkness of stories like this.
it's heavy stuff.
But I believe there's always hope.
There is. There's always something we can do.
There is.
I think the most important thing is to stay informed.
Stay informed.
Be aware of the dangers that exist and take steps to protect yourself and your loved ones.
And support those organizations that are working so hard.
Like the Lower Recovery Center.
To prevent these tragedies.
Right.
And I think most importantly, never forget the victims.
Never forget.
Their stories deserve to be heard.
Absolutely.
And their lives deserve to be remembered.
They do.
So it's been a heavy deep dive.
It has.
But it's an important one.
It's so important.
The Texas killing fields are a stark reminder
They are.
of the vulnerability that exists in our world.
Yeah.
And the need for all of us to be vigilant,
Right.
to be compassionate, and to be proactive.
To look out for each other.
In creating a safer future. We owe it to the victims, to their families, and to ourselves.
And to ourselves.
To never let these stories fade from memory.